If you've been trying to follow along singing the spiritual songs books in meetings and you're having a hard time understanding what they're even saying, these videos are for you. First of all, you might be wondering, why are there even these and thous in here? What is this? It's like a different language. Well, it basically is. It's Old English, or it's actually more like Middle English, but we won't get into the details of like the history of English too much, but you do have to be kind of aware of it in order to understand what these even are. So over time, English as a language has changed. Some words that we used to use, we don't really use anymore, and some words that we used to use, we use in a different way now. These and thous are an example of some words that we just don't use anymore. So why are they in our hymn books, you might be wondering? It's a bug. The shortest version I can give you is that when the Bible was translated into English, most people who were speaking English used some forms of these and thous. Because many Bible translations used these and thous, as the language changed, people were still using the Bibles that had been translated maybe 50 years earlier, 100 years earlier. These and thous became associated in our minds with religious contexts. So when people wrote religious poetry and hymns and prayed and talked about the Bible, sometimes people continued to use thee and thou even if they didn't really use them in their normal everyday language. I think what started to happen more in the last 100 years was that people began to think of the these and thous as sounding more solemn and more formal. Because it was archaic, it sounded like more important. So people continued to use thee and thou in their prayers and in their hymn writing, I think because it sounded more reverent. So now we're in a situation where we have all these great hymns that were written using thee and thou, and it's so far out of our normal way of talking that it's really hard for people to understand what these are even saying. So you might be wondering, well, why not just use different hymns? Honestly, I just think it's because these hymns are so good. So if you're into songwriting and poetry, I would encourage you to take these hymns and consider translating some of them, like into modern English, or writing your own hymns, trying to really get the depth and the complexity that these hymns reflect. Because a lot of Christian songs today, even though they're really good, they don't pack as much into each song as some of these hymns did. And I think that's why we're kind of hanging on to them. I certainly really like these hymns. One more thing I want to note is that when you're reading through these hymns, you might find some these and thous that don't quite fit the pattern. Because these and thous weren't widely used, even at the time some of the older hymns were written, they didn't actually use them correctly in the poetry. Another reason is because some of these songs have been translated from other languages, and in order to get the words to fit and have the right number of syllables and for it to rhyme, the translator might have fudged a little. Some groups like the Quakers actually used these and thous in a little bit different way from what the mainstream was. You might find this really frustrating, but just remember, the important thing is that you can understand what the hymn is saying, and hopefully as you are better able to understand the hymn, you can appreciate the deep meaning in the hymns and the rich poetry that really goes into them. I hope this video was helpful. Hit the like button, subscribe, leave me a comment to let me know if you want me to keep making these videos, because there's a lot more in these hymns that can be explained.